Friends, we have gathered here not to add another technique to our spiritual toolbox, nor to discover a new method by which we may draw to ourselves the things of this world. If that were our purpose, we would simply be repeating the age-old struggle of humanity, the attempt to improve the outer scene through force of mind or through the manipulation of thought. But that is not our purpose. Our purpose is far simpler, far quieter, and infinitely more profound. We are here to turn within, to recognize that all the good we have ever sought has been present within our own being from the beginning. Every seeker, at some point along the path, comes to an inner weariness. You may have felt it yourself. A tiredness of striving, of reaching for something, peace, supply, safety, companionship, and discovering that the harder you pursue these things, the farther away they seem to drift. This weariness is not a failure. It is a grace. It is the moment in which the personal self exhausts its capacity to make life conform to its desires, and in that exhaustion, a doorway opens. For only when we cease trying to live by personal power do we become receptive to the presence that has always been living us. In the infinite way, we learn that true spiritual progress begins not with more effort, but with the relinquishment of effort. Not with stronger affirmations, but with a deeper stillness. Not with a hope of changing the outer world, but with a recognition that God appearing as our very consciousness is already the fullness of life. When we come into this awareness, we stop chasing after effects. We stop trying to shape the world out there. We begin instead to rest in the simple truth. God is the source and the activity of our good, and that good unfolds from within. If, then, you have come here burdened with the desire to make something happen in your experience, to manifest more money, more help, more harmony, I ask only that for this hour you set aside the burden, lay it gently at your feet. You do not have to solve your problems. You do not have to find the answers. You do not have to create the good you seek. You need only become still and let the activity of God reveal itself as the very life that is living you. When we are quiet enough, receptive enough, humble enough to listen, a great peace dawns, and in that peace the need to struggle dissolves. Let us begin by recognizing that everything we have sought through human means already exists in the invisible realm of spirit. It awaits not our effort, but our awareness. And so we turn inward not to gain, not to acquire, but to behold that which is already established in truth. This is the beginning of living by grace. Let us turn our attention now to one of the most important distinctions on the spiritual path, one that, when understood, marks the turning point from a life lived through personal effort to a life lived through divine fulfillment. I speak of the difference between living under law and living under grace. When we speak of law in this context, we are not referring to moral commandments or legal structures. We are speaking of life lived from the standpoint of the human mind, life governed by cause and effect, by planning and striving, by the belief that our good must be earned, acquired, attracted, or achieved. Living under law is simply living under the sense that I, the personal self, must secure my future, solve my problems, and manage the conditions of my life. Let us begin by recognizing that everything we have sought through human means already exists in the invisible realm of spirit. It awaits not our effort, but our awareness. And so we turn inward not to gain, not to acquire, but to behold that which is already established in truth. This is the beginning of living by grace. And so we think, we plan, we fear, we push, we strive, We live as though we are separated from the source and therefore responsible for drawing supply to ourselves. But there is another way, revealed to the mystics of every age, the way of grace. To live by grace is to live under the activity of God, an invisible presence that goes before us, prepares the way, and fulfills itself as our daily good. Grace is not something we earn, nor is it something we must call forth. Grace is the very nature of God, eternally expressing itself as harmony, as abundance, as wholeness, as peace. When we live by grace, we are no longer trying to make good appear. We are bearing witness to the good that is already present in the invisible, awaiting our recognition. We are no longer laboring to secure our supply. We are resting in the assurance that supply flows from within as the spontaneous activity of the divine presence that inhabits us. We do not need to command, direct, or manipulate. We need only to abide in the quiet realization that God is fulfilling itself as every necessary form of good. And so the shift from law to grace is not a shift in external activity, it is a shift in consciousness. It is the moment when we stop believing that we live apart from God and begin to understand that God lives as us. Once this truth is felt deeply, silently, not merely as an idea but as an inner recognition, the entire basis of life changes. We find that doors open without effort. Needs are met before we voice them. Right relationships form naturally. Guidance appears in moments of stillness. We meet life no longer as isolated individuals, but as instruments through which grace flows. To live by grace is not to abandon the world, nor to stop acting intelligently. It is to act from a different center. Instead of acting out of fear, we act out of peace. Instead of seeking, we listen. Instead of striving, we allow. Instead of attempting to govern life, we let the presence govern us. And in that stillness, something miraculous happens. Everything necessary for our journey unfolds in perfect order, without strain and without delay. In this way, life becomes an experience of watching, not pushing, witnessing, not manipulating, trusting, not fearing. And this is the beginning of spiritual freedom. As we continue, let us look gently and honestly at a tendency almost all of us bring with us when we first step onto the spiritual path, the desire to manifest. We wish to manifest health, manifest supply, manifest harmony, manifest companionship, and because these desires seem natural, we seldom question them. We believe that if only we could bring into form those things we lack, then our spiritual lives would be complete. But let us look more deeply. The very impulse to manifest reveals that we are still living in the belief of separation, for no one who is consciously abiding in the presence of God feels a sense of lack. No one who knows that God is their life, their substance, their very being, feels compelled to add anything to themselves. The desire to manifest grows out of the conviction that something is missing, that something essential lies outside of us and must be attracted or created. And this belief, this subtle assumption, is the very thing that prevents us from experiencing the fullness of spiritual supply. Whenever we seek to manifest, we are quietly affirming, I do not have. And no matter how positive our affirmations, how strong our visualizations, how disciplined our practices, if beneath it all lies the belief in lack, we will continue to draw to us the fruits of that belief. This is why so many who work hard to manifest discover only temporary gains, followed by further longing. For the consciousness that sets out to acquire is the consciousness that assumes itself incomplete. But in truth, hear this, in truth, you already embody the completeness of God. The kingdom of God is not something to be brought into your experience through mental means. It is something to be recognized as the spiritual reality of your being. So long as you are chasing effects, you cannot perceive the cause. So long as you are striving to change the outer scene, you cannot behold the inner truth. When your attention is directed outward toward forms, conditions, results, you are looking away from the very source from which all good flows. This does not mean that your desires are wrong. It means only that the way to their fulfillment does not lie in pursuit. It lies in realization. The moment you stop trying to make good appear, the moment you cease attempting to shape life by human power, you create an opening within a stillness through which grace can reveal itself. In that quiet recognition, needs seem to dissolve, not because they have been fulfilled outwardly, but because you perceive that nothing essential has ever been absent. It is this inner shift, this transition from seeking to realizing, that marks the end of spiritual struggle. When you rest in the awareness that God is the fullness of your being, the outer forms appear in perfect order without effort or fear. Not because you manifested them, but because there is no longer a consciousness of separation to obstruct the flow of grace. Therefore, I say, cease striving, cease seeking, cease attempting to draw to yourself that which is already yours. Turn gently within and let the presence reveal its own abundance as your experience. Now let us come to a foundational principle of the infinite way, a principle upon which all spiritual supply rests, and I would ask that you do not try to grasp this merely with the intellect. Let it settle into you quietly. As truth dawns gently in the receptive heart, spiritual supply is not something God gives you. Spiritual supply is God itself appearing as your consciousness, fulfilling its own nature through you. This is the essence of the teaching. Supply is not money. Supply is not opportunity. Supply is not outer conditions arranged in your favor. These are but the forms changing, fleeting, temporary, through which the real supply reveals itself. But the substance behind all form, the source behind every good you have ever known, is the presence of God. When you understand this, you will never again live in fear of loss, for what you seem to lose was never the source. It was but a temporary form through which the source expressed itself. The forms come and go, as all things in the world must, but the substance, the spiritual essence, remains eternally present, eternally active, eternally fulfilling. When Jesus said, "I have meat ye know not of," he was pointing to this very principle. There is a hidden wellspring within every individual, the Christ, the divine consciousness that pours itself forth as supply, as harmony, as healing, as peace. We do not have to draw it forth. We do not have to ask for it. We do not have to convince it to appear. It is forever flowing, forever giving of itself. Our only task is to recognize its presence. When we live in the awareness of spiritual supply, we cease looking to people, conditions, or circumstances as our source. We no longer fear their absence, nor cling to their presence. We begin to see that every form of good that enters our experience is but the activity of God made visible for a moment. The forms change, but the source never changes. You may find that one day your supply seems to come through work, another day through intuition, another through an unexpected avenue, and another through pure spiritual revelation. Do not become attached to the channels. They are not the source. They are merely the ways in which the infinite appears at a given moment. As you realize this, something beautiful occurs. The grip of fear loosens, the sense of anxiety fades, the burden of personal responsibility lifts. You begin to live with a gentle assurance, an inner knowing that your good is not dependent on the world, nor on other people, nor even on your own human strength. It rests in the unchanging nature of God. When this realization becomes established in consciousness, not as a concept, but as lived awareness, you will find that supply flows in ways you could never have orchestrated. It appears without strain, without forcing, without anxious planning. It reveals itself naturally, as effortlessly as light fills a room when the curtains are drawn back. This is the true principle of spiritual supply. God fulfills God's own nature as your experience. And the recognition of this truth is the beginning of freedom from all fear concerning your daily needs. As we move deeper into this study, let us look with honesty upon the nature of effort, especially spiritual effort, and see why it so often becomes an obstacle rather than a help. For many who come to the spiritual path, there is a sincere desire to do something, to practice something, to engage in some inner work that will bring about the harmony they seek. And yet, the very impulse to do is frequently the barrier to the realization of truth. The ego, that sense of a separate self, believes that it must accomplish something. It believes it must improve itself, correct the world, generate supply, attract harmony, or hold peace in place. And because the ego feels itself alone and vulnerable, it exerts tremendous effort in the hope of securing safety and fulfillment. Even our spiritual practices, affirmations, visualizations, techniques of manifestation can become subtle expressions of the ego's need for control. But I say to you, where there is effort, there is the belief in separation. Where there is striving, there is the belief that God is not already the fullness of your being. Effort arises from fear. It may appear refined, disciplined, or spiritual, but beneath it lies the quiet conviction, unless I do something, good will not come. And the moment we accept this belief, we place ourselves under the law of personal responsibility with all its burdens and limitations. The spiritual life, however, does not unfold through effort. It unfolds through realization. It unfolds through the surrender of the belief in a self apart from God. It unfolds as we release the compulsion to make things happen and become still enough to witness what God is already doing. Let us be clear. I am not speaking of passivity, nor of neglecting one's duties. Life will always call us to act lovingly, wisely, practically. But action that arises from inner stillness is entirely different from action born of fear. When the ego acts, it struggles, resists, clings, and fears the outcome. When the spirit acts, it does so effortlessly, without anxiety, without conflict, without the sense that anything depends on personal strength. This is why I often say, the activity of God is the law of fulfillment. Your effort is not the law of fulfillment. Your mental power is not the law of fulfillment. Your affirmations and visualizations are not the law of fulfillment. Only the invisible activity of God moving silently as your own consciousness fulfills itself in perfect form. When we stop trying to direct life, to push life, to shape life, something extraordinary happens. Into the silence left by our relinquishment, the divine presence shines forth. It is as though a window has been opened, and the light that was always present finally floods in. This light brings clarity, direction, supply, and harmony, not because we demanded it, but because we no longer obstruct it. So I ask you gently, where in your life are you striving? Where are you still attempting to force a result? Where do you feel the tension of I must? Wherever you find that tension, you have discovered the activity of the ego, and the remedy is always the same. Lay down the effort, become still, turn inward, and rest in the silent assurance that God is already the life, the mind, the substance, and the activity of your being. In this stillness, grace flows. And what the ego sought through effort, grace reveals through realization. And now we come to the heart of spiritual living, the point upon which the entire infinite way rests, the cultivation of inner stillness. For although truth exists fully and completely within every individual, it cannot be recognized while the mind is filled with noise, while it is occupied with fear, with desire, with planning, with personal will, with the constant search for solutions. We cannot hear the gentle voice of the Spirit while we are shouting inwardly for answers. And so I say to you, let us learn the art of being still, not the stillness of a body forced into quiet, but the stillness of a mind yielded to the presence within. This stillness is not achieved through discipline alone, nor through technique. It is achieved through a simple willingness to stop directing life and to listen for the activity of God. Inner stillness is the atmosphere in which grace becomes visible. When you become quiet, truly quiet, not waiting for anything, not seeking anything, not trying to attract, manifest, or achieve, but resting in the assurance that God is, something begins to stir. A gentle peace rises, not from the intellect, but from the depths of your being. This peace does not come to you. It reveals itself as you. It is the presence announcing its own nature. Do not seek an experience. Do not search for visions, feelings, or signs. Simply enter the silence with one intention: to be receptive to God. And even if nothing seems to occur in those moments, remain faithful. The seed of truth is sprouting beneath the soil of your consciousness, and it will break forth when the ground is ready. Let us consider for a moment what inner stillness actually is. It is the suspension of mental activity. It is the release of personal striving. It is the quiet realization that God is the only presence and the only power, and therefore there is no need to add anything, change anything, or direct anything. In that stillness, you are not trying to live your life. You are letting God live itself as you. This is the beginning of a miraculous shift. As you rest in silence, fear dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because you withdrew the belief in two powers. Lack disappears, not because you attracted abundance, but because you realize supply as the nature of God. Harmony returns, not because you corrected the world, but because you stopped attempting to govern it through personal will. In the inner stillness, you discover that you are not the doer, you are the witness. And the more deeply you realize this, the more freely grace flows. Many students ask, how long must I sit in silence? But silence is not measured in minutes. Silence is measured in receptivity. It may come in a breath, or it may come after many moments of relaxation from thought. Do not strain for it. Do not attempt to force it. Simply become still and allow the presence to make itself known in its own way, in its own time. And when it does, when that quiet click within announces the truth, you will know that you have touched the realm in which grace speaks. And in that wordless communion, all the good you ever sought is already fulfilled. Let us now look at how grace expresses itself in the everyday experiences of our human journey. For spiritual truth must never remain an abstraction. It must become the living atmosphere of our daily walk. And yet, grace does not always reveal itself with drama or spectacle. More often, it comes as a gentle harmony, a quiet adjustment, an unseen hand guiding us in ways we could never have orchestrated. When we speak of health, for instance, we are not speaking of a physical condition that must be improved or corrected by spiritual force. We are speaking of the realization that life, divine life, is the substance of our being. As we rest in the awareness of this truth, the fear that gives power to disease begins to dissolve. And when fear dissolves, the body often responds with renewed harmony. But even more importantly, we find ourselves lifted into a peace that is independent of the body's condition. We discover that our true self has never been touched by illness, never vulnerable to decay. This recognition is itself the healing. So it is with supply. The world teaches us to measure supply in numbers, bank accounts, salaries, possessions, but spiritual supply is not a quantity. It is a presence. And when we trust this presence, when we stop trying to secure our future through anxious planning, we find that the necessary forms appear naturally. A step reveals itself. An opportunity unfolds. An unexpected avenue opens. This is not magic. It is the natural rhythm of a life lived in alignment with divine harmony. The outer form is always secondary. The inner realization is primary. In relationships, too, grace works in quiet and beautiful ways. When we stop trying to change others, when we stop demanding that they behave according to our expectations, a new harmony emerges. We begin to see through appearances. We begin to recognize the same divine presence that lives in us living in them. And as this recognition deepens, criticism softens, resentment dissolves, and forgiveness becomes effortless. Sometimes relationships heal. Sometimes they gently dissolve. But in either case, the movement of grace brings peace, not conflict. Remember always, grace does not follow our human outline. It does not conform to our desires or our sense of timing. Grace appears as the fulfillment of divine wisdom, not human will. And because divine wisdom sees farther than we ever could, its unfoldment is always perfect, though we may not recognize its perfection immediately. Many students ask, how will I know when grace is operating in my life? And the answer is simple. You will know it by the peace that precedes the form. You will know it when outer good begins to appear without strain. You will know it when decisions flow naturally, when the right people enter your life without effort, when problems resolve without conflict, when you find yourself guided by an inner certainty that is not your own. Grace is not dramatic, but is unmistakable. It is the evidence of God fulfilling himself as your experience. And as you become more accustomed to turning inward, more willing to rest in the silence, more ready to trust the invisible presence, you will find grace appearing in every area of your life, not as something you make happen, but as something you witness. This is the beauty of spiritual living. Nothing is forced, and everything is fulfilled. Let us now bring this teaching into the rhythm of daily living. For truth must ultimately become the atmosphere in which we breathe, the consciousness from which we act, and the presence we return to throughout the day. Spiritual realization is not achieved in a single moment of illumination, nor is it sustained through occasional periods of meditation alone. It is a continual turning, a continual remembering, a continual resting in the awareness that God is the life of our being. Each morning, before thought begins its activity, take a moment, however brief, to acknowledge the presence, not as a ritual, not as a discipline, but as a simple inner turning. Feel, if only faintly, that life within you, which is not personal, not separate, not burdened by fear, in that quiet recognition, you begin the day not as a self trying to achieve harmony, but as an instrument through which harmony can flow. As you move into the activities of the day, let this awareness accompany you. You need not withdraw from your work, your responsibilities, your interactions, The spiritual life is not lived apart from human experience. It is lived through it. But carry with you that gentle remembrance, I of mine own self can do nothing. The Father within doeth the works. This remembrance does not weaken your activity. It strengthens it because it frees you from the burden of personal effort. There will be moments when fear arises, when tension builds, when circumstances seem to demand immediate human control. In such moments, pause, even briefly. Turn inward. Release the impulse to govern the situation with human will, and let the presence, which never leaves you, reveal the next step. You may find that the correct action comes as a clear intuition, or perhaps as the sudden dissolving of tension, or even as the understanding that no action is needed at all. In the evening, before retiring, look back over the day, not with judgment, not with analysis, but with quiet gratitude. Recognize the moments when grace was evident, even subtly. Notice when peace preceded action, when solutions arose without struggle, when harmony was restored without force. And if there were moments of forgetfulness, moments of fear or reaction, simply acknowledge them and let them go. The path is not one of perfection, but of continual returning. To live by grace is to live moment by moment in the awareness that God is the only presence and power functioning as your life. It is not achieved through striving, but through yielding, not through self-improvement, but through self-surrender, not through the attempt to attract good, but through the recognition that good flows eternally from within. As this awareness deepens, you will find that even the simplest activities, washing dishes, speaking to a friend, walking down the street, become opportunities for inward communion. Life becomes a prayer without words, a meditation without form, a continuous resting in the secret place of the Most High. This is the daily walk of grace. Not extraordinary, not dramatic, but deeply peaceful, profoundly natural, silently transformative. A life in which the presence goes before you, accompanies you, and fulfills itself through you in every moment. And now, as we bring our time together to a close, let us return once more to the simple essence of this teaching. You have not been given a new method, nor a new set of steps to follow, nor a new discipline with which to shape your life. Instead, you have been invited into a deeper simplicity, a way of living rooted in quiet recognition rather than in personal striving. For centuries, humanity has sought peace, abundance, healing, and harmony through effort, mental effort, emotional effort, religious effort. But the spiritual life reveals that all such effort is unnecessary, for the fullness of God is already embodied within you. What we seek does not lie in the realm of effects. It lies in the invisible presence which is forever expressing itself as your very being. Therefore, do not leave here today thinking there is something more you must do. There is nothing to do, only something to realize. There is no truth to acquire, only truth to acknowledge. There is no God to reach, only God to behold. Let this understanding become your resting place. Grace, not effort, is the law of your life. Grace, not thought, is the source of your supply. Grace, not human will, governs your harmony. Grace fulfills itself without your planning, your pleading, or your striving. And so, I ask you only this: be still often. Turn inward gently. Release the sense of a self that must accomplish anything, and in that sacred silence, allow the presence to reveal itself as your peace, your supply, your protection, your direction, your fulfillment. Let God be God in you. When you walk from this moment, walk not as one who must improve life, but as one who rests in the divine activity that is already perfect, already complete, already expressing itself as every facet of your experience. As you do, you will find that the outer world adjusts, harmonizes, and unfolds, not because you have changed it, but because you have ceased standing in the way of the infinite that has always been present. This is the path of grace. This is the joy of spiritual living, and this is the freedom that awaits every soul who turns quietly within and listens.